Building a PC is easier than most people think. Keep watching to find out how. Start by grabbing all of your parts. If you want to know what parts you need, check out my video on the subject. Now we'll pull our motherboard out of its box and then put it on top of the motherboard box. When installing a CPU, you need to find the golden triangle on the CPU and then the triangle on the socket. Next, you raise the arm on the socket and insert the CPU with the triangles pointing towards each other. The CPU should fall in without applying any force. Next, pull down the arm and your CPU is installed. When installing RAM, you need to make sure the modules are oriented correctly because there is a notch that will only go into the RAM slot one way. Next, pull back the clips on either side and then insert and press the RAM until you hear it click into place. You may have thermal paste already applied on your cooler, but if you don't, you can put a small pea-sized amount on the center of your CPU. When installing the CPU cooler, make sure to follow the directions that come with it because each cooler has a different mounting mechanism. My cooler makes use of the default AMD mounting system, so all I need to do is put clips on either side of the CPU and then push it on. Grab the fan connector from your CPU fan and plug it into the CPU fan header on your motherboard. It's much easier to do it now than it will be when we put the motherboard in the case. Next, install the standoffs for your motherboard. My motherboard is as tall as, but not as wide as standard ATX, so I don't need to install all of the standoffs that you would normally need to for an ATX motherboard. Make sure that your standoffs are in the right orientation and pattern, and make sure that they are tightened all the way down or your motherboard won't sit flat. Make sure to put your I/O shield into your case before your motherboard, or else you'll have to take your motherboard out to put it in. Make sure it clicks into place in all corners, and then you'll be good. Next, put your motherboard in your case. You should make sure that the screw holes in the motherboard line up with the standoffs that we put in earlier. Next, screw down the motherboard and make sure that it is secure. Installing SSDs is pretty simple, but is also different in most cases. For this case, there is a mount at the back that the SSDs just slide into. Most hard drive installs are similar, but again, they vary based on what case you're using. For this case, you slide the hard drive in and then screw it in with 2 screws on both sides. The power supply is easy to install in this case because it doesn't have a PSU shroud like some cases. Just put it into its slot with the fan facing out of the case and then screw it in the back. Next, we're going to take our 4-pin CPU connectors from our power supply and then plug them into the CPU power port in the top left of the motherboard. Next, we'll take our 24-pin connector from our power supply and then plug it into the motherboard, making sure that it clips on and clicks into place. Now we'll start connecting front panel connectors. Find the audio connector from your case and then plug it into the audio connector on your motherboard. Make sure it's in the right orientation by looking for the missing pin on the audio header and matching it with the missing hole on the case's connector. Now plug in all of your fan cables to the motherboard's fan headers. You can check the orientation by looking at the plastic ridges on the end of each cable. Plug the front USB 2 cable into the motherboard's USB 2 header. The USB header looks quite similar to the audio header, but the pin layouts are different, so make sure you plug it into the right header. Next, we're going to plug in our front panel connectors. These are for power and reset switches, as well as the power and hard drive LEDs. There's usually a layout diagram on the motherboard, but if there isn't, make sure to check the motherboard manual. These pins are a little bit hard to put in individually, so I like to group them up and then put them in. If your case comes with a speaker like mine, you can plug it in where the front panel connectors connect in the speaker slot. To plug in front USB 3, find the USB 3 header on your motherboard and then plug in the case's USB 3 cable to the header. There is a slot in the header and a ridge on the cable, so make sure that you get the orientation right or else it won't fit in. Next, we're going to bend off or unscrew our PCIe covers on the back of our case to install the Ethernet adapter into the top PCIe 1X slot. Then all we need to do is screw it into the case. We will repeat the process from the Ethernet adapter for the graphics card, which are usually 2 or 3 slots. We'll then take the graphics card and plug it into the top PCIe 16X slot and then screw it in. Now we're going to plug in the 6-pin power connector for the GPU to make sure that it gets power. Next, we're going to plug in SATA power from our power supply and SATA data cables into our SATA drives. These cables only plug in one orientation, so make sure to look for the L shape on the connectors. Next, plug the other end of the SATA data cable into the motherboard. Some Ryzen motherboards disable certain SATA ports if you are using the second M.2 slot, so make sure you use the right ports for your motherboard. Next, make sure to check that your PC boots up and then throw in the side panels and you're done. In my next video, I'm going to cover installing Ubuntu Server on this PC, so make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss the next video. I also stream occasionally on Twitch at twitch.tv/WarriorOx, so make sure you come check it out when I'm streaming. That's all for today. I'll see you guys in the next video.